I would like to welcome our first speaker, Charlotte Moss. She's one of the most recognized names in the design world. Her extraordinary eye is revered throughout the industry. She's used this experience to design furniture for Century, china for Picard, clothing for Ibu, and jewelry for P.E. Guerin, just to name a few. Charlotte is also a prolific author, having penned over 11 books on decorating, design, gardens, and entertaining. Her most recent book, Charlotte Moss Flowers, was released in April 2021. Charlotte, are you there?
I'm here, dear.
Yay! Okay. Well,
can you see me? Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can see you, Tommy. I can hear you. Our
Perfect.
young audience will not get that Who reference, but anyway.
Okay.
So I'm going to just launch in to Charlotte's PowerPoint that is absolutely gorgeous. Y'all are so blessed and lucky to be able to see this today. This obviously is what on the front, Charlotte? This opener.
That is the cover of the book.
How about that?
Yeah.
We love it.
Shot with gardens, roses from my garden.
Yeah. What a lot of people may not realize is that not only is Charlotte the consummate interior designer and entertainer, but she is one of the best gardeners that I know. And that's saying a lot because I know a lot of great gardeners. So we're going to just launch into Charlotte's presentation. And Charlotte, tell us about this.
Well, first, let me just say about why do a book on flowers when you're an interior decorator, because a lot of people have asked me that question. And, you know, I think it all boils down to the fact that probably everyone on this call, the lover of beauty, and flowers to me just represent the essence of that, really. And so I'm going to talk just a tad about the book in the end, but I thought that today, because we haven't been traveling, that we could do a little garden mind traveling. So if some you've already seen, well, it'll just be a deja vu, hopefully a pleasant one. And then maybe if it's something that you haven't done, it'll help you plan a trip for the future. But one thing I think we all have in common, those of us that love flowers, are flower memories. And for me, it was those necklace competitions with my cousins sitting in my grandmother's lawn with either, you know, clover flowers or dandelions or buttercups or something, where we made necklaces. You know, it was very much a competitive sport back then. And the violets that my grandmother had on her lawn, and then the gorgeous irises that years later now I've planted an iris garden thinking back on my grandmother.
Love that. Yes, I remember those clover chains and crowns. Did you do crowns?
Oh, we did it. We did it all, honey. We had all the bijou going with the flower.
Of course you did. The flower bling. Oh my. Okay. Well, let's start right now with this first amazing garden, Sissinghurst.
You know, I put Sissinghurst first because I think, you know, even if you're not a gardener and you just read Vita Sackville West or anything that Harold Nicholson did, that Sissinghurst always comes up in that conversation. And it is really the quintessential English garden, and created by two people that really in some ways couldn't have been more different, but that's what created this garden. Harold was the classicist. He was the architect of the garden. He gave it structure and form, and Vita gave it romance. Just the way she wrote, she crafted her garden, famous, of course, for the white garden that actually started out as a white rose garden and then morphed into white flowers as all the roses were moved to just a singular rose garden about 1950. But it is not to be missed if you're in the UK. And that's really how I've tried to define some of these gardens, as the not to be missed ones. So the next one is Modestfont Abbey, which is the home, and it's not a very elaborate house, but the garden is magnificent. It is the walled garden that is roses, for anyone that's been. It is the of the National Rose Collection in the UK, and that the garden itself was crafted by Graham Stewart Thomas, who actually has a rose named after him, the great rosarian Graham Stewart Thomas. And he's created an incredible rose garden there. So that's just a jewel.
So Charlotte, are those clematis, those purple flowers?
Yeah, the clematis in the middle.
Okay, so inquiring minds want to know clematis or clematis.
I hear it both ways. Most of my British friends will say clematis.
Okay, then that's what we're saying, because they ought to know.
They ought to know, right?
Oh my, Hidcote. Is it Hidcote or Hidcote?
Hidcote.
Hidcote.
Yeah.
Is this the same trip that you and I went on?
Yes, that was, and I wish I could include that entire trip, but maybe that's another talk sometime. But years, Margot and I put together a group of, I guess, all gardening aficionados to go to England to start at the Chelsea Flower Show. But the real goal of the trip was to visit all of Nancy Lancaster's houses, Hazley, Ditchley, and Kelmarsh, all very different, but all delicious. And Margot and I scooted away one day when everyone was doing something else at Dalesford, and we just wanted to go back to Hidcote. So we went and scoured around, and there weren't that many people there that day, which is always really special, because then you get to take pictures without people in them, which is lovely.
No offense to people, but you're right. Yeah, gorgeous.
But the thing about this garden, started by Lawrence Johnson, a property purchased by his mother, but he cultivated the garden, became a British citizen, actually served in the British Army, and spent a lot of his time here and his garden in France. But the feature of this garden is garden rooms. There are these intimate enclosures. One pulls you to the next, like you can see in the upper right. You see that door, that opening, that's just luring you to the next one. And Sissinghurst did that too. And I think Sissinghurst was really the first garden to be known for its garden rooms, but certainly Hidcote is a very special one. And years ago, I was honored by the Royal Oak Society, and that gala evening, all the funds went to Hidcote. So I have a special soft spot for Hidcote.
I love that blue of the gate,
which I have copied in my own garden.
It looks familiar.
Well, see, but that's what we do. We go, we get inspired, get ideas, we exchange ideas with garden owners and other garden travelers and visit. And there's always things that we can bring back and adapt. So I think one of the things that I always try to drive home when I'm with a group or something is that don't ever let a grand and big, large garden put you off with respect to ideas, because there's always some morsel of something. There's always something that can be brought home, adapted for your own garden. And other examples we'll go through throughout.
Yeah, your garden is a perfect example of that, and just always looking for that one pearl maybe that you can string to your necklace at home.
Yeah, I think my husband lives in fear of that, Margot, that every off on a garden, like, what is she going to do now?
Yeah, but he always loves the result.
Right. Okay. So the Chelsea Flower Show, for those people on our Zoom that haven't been, it really is a place to behold. It is garden enthusiasts like you've never seen anywhere on this planet, gorgeous gardens, and then people that are just special growers of special plants that are all forced to be at the peak of perfection during May, during the Chelsea Flower Show. Long time ago, when my husband was running investment banking at Merrill Lynch, a banker came to him, an English banker, and said they would like to take a marquee at the Chelsea Flower Show on opening night, because that's when the Queen comes and it's a big deal for Brits. And he came home and said, so what do you think about this? Like, the bankers want to do a marquee at a flower show? And I went, well, what flower show? He says, I went, done. So
That's right.
They took the marquee. We went that evening. The Queen came, whatever. We're walking through the stands and we're in the middle of David Austin gloriousness with roses hanging everywhere. And my husband hears Barry. And my husband turns around and it's the chairman of the Bank of England. So the two of them had a chat. I walked around and looked at the roses, and P.S. never again did anyone have to come to Barry to justify the cost of a marquee at the Chelsea Flower Show. But it is my favorite story of all, because people think of it as, well, maybe that's something for gardening ladies.
Yeah.
No, it is a gardening nation, the UK. And that sort of said it all.
It really is. I mean, it's in their DNA over there, and everything seems to grow beautifully. You could plant a telephone pole and it would grow. But yeah, the Chelsea Flower Show, and we, as you said earlier, we launched our trip there, and it was just such a fabulous way to get inspired. Really, almost overwhelming. There's so much incredible floral beauty.
Right. And so then you have to make yourself a promise to come back.
That's right. As we have. I probably won't get a marquee, but I can go back. All right, so here we are across the channel in Paris.
In Paris. I just had to put it in because I think it's one of those places when people say, where do you want to go first when you start to travel? And everybody says, I just need a dose of Paris. And I just have visuals of that beautiful flower shop on the Rue Saint-Père, where all the flowers are spilling out onto the street and vines are growing on bamboo, and there's flowering standards along the sidewalk. And another one on the Rue de Université. And then, of course, you know, Henri Mouly and the flowers spilling out into the Place Bourbon. So there are so many flower memories of Paris, you could just go on forever.
Is that, just to interrupt, is that Robert Rigaud, his shop on the right, upper right?
Yeah, the old shop, I think.
Okay, yeah, because he's here now with, in the States. Okay, but I bet that was fabulous. He's such a wonderful designer.
Yeah.
Chateau de Groussay.
There's so many things to be said about this garden, but you know, it dates back. It's in Normandy. My husband and I did a tour of the beaches in Normandy during our American history tour, and I wove some gardens in, and this was the greatest blessing of all of them. It's really an Italianate garden in a 14th century chateau, at least the core of it. But the Worth family, Didier and the late Barbara Worth, restored it, and just such a beautiful job of the chateau and the gardens. But it speaks to all the elements of an Italian garden with water and statuary and whatnot. And what you can barely see here, and I wish we had time to just go through more slides, but the slide on the right, if you see that little brown sort of dot in the middle, if you can zoom in, it's a fountain that Barbara designed. It's all artichokes, which she thought sort of spoke to France, and the water spills over the artichokes. So for a 14th century chateau owned by really an inspired couple with great taste and stewardship of a beautiful property, that they've managed to take it to the next level and leave something of their own, which I think is one of the greatest things anyone can do with a historic property.
Just add an element, a little personal touch. The artichoke fountain is perfect. It fits in, but it's a little sassy. I love it.
Yeah, it's a little sassy, right? So you really can't talk about French gardens without harking back to Malmaison when Empress Josephine lived there, and created her incredible greenhouses. I mean, she was a great patron of the arts. She was a great patron of gardens, but this was the one that she really spent most of her time in. And that greenhouse, she had over 250 varieties of roses, planted from all over the world, because, hello, she was married to Napoleon, and Napoleon sent people on expeditions, zoologists, you know, arborists, to bring back specimens for Malmaison. But, you know, and all the little items on the bottom there are things that are in the museum on the top floor that were from their era. Her Sèvres, her Van Huysen painting, and her flower embroidered slippers, which are delicious. But, you know, I did read a book recently.
Yeah, it was a book on Napoleon and his flowers.
Yes, I Instagrammed it because I just thought, oh, I wish other people would go out and buy that book, because if you love history, and which I do, and it combines gardens and history and things that I didn't know about Napoleon. And, you know, he was concerned about horticulture just about everywhere he went. But when he was, you know, when he was sent to Elba, and then he was sent to St. Helena at the, you know, end of his life, he created, and, you know, gardens there. But also when he was a general and leading the French army, he was really concerned about how to feed the soldiers, and wanted to know, why aren't the French cultivating more potatoes and beets and things like that to feed the soldiers? You know, it was like Frederick the Great that said, you feed the armies on their stomachs, or whatever, meaning that if you don't feed your army, you have no army, basically. Right. And so he was always concerned about that. And I have to say, at the end of the book, reading about all he did to create that garden at St. Helena, it was sad. I hated the book to end. Anyway, I could go on about that, but we're not.
Well, I remember reading that that he loved violets, and that all of those sympathizers who had to go underground after he was exiled, their little signal to each other was they would wear a little spray of violets in their lapel. So that's one of my favorite stories.
Flower. Well, you know, it's you think of a general, and you don't necessarily think of flowers, and especially as fleeting as a violet is once it's cut. But I've also learned about one of his generals that I'm now researching that became a Rosarian afterwards. So stay tuned. Next.
Yes, we'll hear more about that later. Okay, Groussay.
Groussay is a privately owned chateau. And I've been there a couple times. The last time I was there was early on Sunday morning. I wanted to go and just have time in all of those follies by myself, and to see the garden. So you go early before everybody else is out there. But there were a few other architects. Carlos de Bestegui was the one that bought the house early 20th century, hired Emilio Terry to help him restore it and build all of these follies. So what I love about Groussay is it's a beautiful chateau and intimate. It's big, but it's not grand, if you know what I mean. The rooms are, even though they're big, you know, that's a delicate balance in decorating. One we all aspire to, really, keeping that intimacy. But it's the landscape with the pyramid and the Palladian bridge and, you know, the Tartar tent, which on the inside, I walked in by myself and I wanted to faint. Ceiling to floor hand-painted tiles. I mean, just heaven.
Wait, this is the interior of the tent to the left?
The tent on the left is metal.
Okay.
And the side is tiled.
Yeah, that's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary.
And what's that chandelier made of, Charlotte?
It's metal.
It looks almost like branches with lichen on them and moss or something.
Well, it could be because it is out in the open, basically.
And it is old. Well, this is something I'm sure that you like to return to, and probably again in the future. These are so inspiring, all these different forms and the whimsy, just, because none of them, they're great.
Whimsy of it. I think it is the whimsy of it because, follies are common in Europe in gardens. And, they date way back. However, it's very unusual to find a number of different follies, especially ones that are so architecturally distinctive.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really special. And it's about an hour from Paris. So you gotta go.
You gotta go.
Yeah.
Okay, Parc de Saint-Cloud.
So this garden and two following, for me, were seminal moments in my gardening life and my enthusiasm for gardening. And I think, anyone that travels and looks at gardens, you have those sort of like, those moments. Well, this was my first moment when I went to a garden. This was a flower and garden festival in the Parc de Saint-Cloud. Beautiful vendors with gorgeous product, growers of all sorts of flowers and plants. And I was with a friend. We were walking down this path and we turned around and dead center. Now, I have talked about this, I swear, for 15 years, but it just shows you the impression certain things make on you. And this was a tree that had died. And they encased it with white chain link and filled it with white doves. And so if you ever think that something is dead and that's the end, think again. Maybe there's an afterlife. And love this. Barry thinks it's totally impractical because what are we going to do with the doves in the wintertime? But I can find any number of dead trees out here in the country, but I just think that that's sort of magical.
It's very magical.
I think it has a life in an event I will do at some point, but not necessarily in my garden. But that was the first sort of moment where I said, wow, I love the way people think. I love something dead. So the possibilities are endless.
I agree. And I like what you said, that it has an afterlife. And we're all about that now, sort of reusing and just restoring. And this is, again, whimsical, fantastical. I want one. So shall I move to the next slide?
Yes.
Chaumont, okay.
So Chaumont is a horticultural school at the Chateau de Chaumont that every year has a festival of gardens where they ask gardeners to create gardens based on themes. And the first time I went, on the left, which I'll explain, the theme was water. And then the second time on the right at the upper image, the theme was the 7 deadly sins. I couldn't wait to see how they would be interpreted in garden. So that one was really about gluttony, the giant basket. And when you walked around the side, it was all filled with things. So that was how gluttony was created. But the one on the left was called Willows in the Mist, created by 2 basket weavers, not gardeners at all, with willow saplings that they planted, they wove, they grew, they wove more, and they created almost a maze. And every once in a while, this mist would appear and you had no idea where. And it was totally romantic, totally mesmerizing. And finally, 2 years ago, I built a living willow pavilion on our property. And I'm so excited about it because we're just at the point now where the roof has grown in, and next year we'll probably have enough willow to create a great finial on the top by weaving it all together. But it all goes back to Chateau de Chaumont. This was probably 1998.
Mm-hmm.
And the willows in the mist, just
even just the title is dreamy and romantic. Talk about those. Are those like overscale pine cones in the bottom?
Yeah. Well, what you can't see are those enormous cedar trees. This was in the park at Chaumont, unrelated to any of the created gardens by gardeners. But underneath these enormous cedar trees, oh God, the name of the wood sculptor now escapes me and I'm embarrassed, but he took trees and carved giant pine cones and just dropped them in this little area where these enormous cedar trees were. And again, that was magical because you walked by and you had to take a double take. Whoa, that's a pine. And then of course there were cedar trees, but you knew they didn't fall. But it was sort of fairy tale-ish. It was great.
Yeah, where'd those come from? Yeah. Now, wouldn't you like to have one of those in your garden, Charlotte?
A giant pine cone? Yeah, you can text Barry that this afternoon.
Okay, we'll have a conversation. You go back and back to Ulsan, don't you?
I go back and back and back and back because it is probably the last of the three, the one that made the greatest impression. I'd always wanted to go. And the great story here is it was created by Patrice Tarabella and his then partner, who Patrice was an architect in Paris, didn't want to wait his whole life waiting for the perfect client. So went out looking for a property that he could craft from his own imagination, and found a 12th century priory that was totally derelict. And after years of going back and forth with the French government, got permission and crafted this beauty. I can't even describe it on this property. It is magnificent, 20 years on. It's been published in a couple books, Vogue's book of Houses, Gardens, People, the latest issue that Hamish did. And what I learned here was about the imagination, just like that white tree. The image on the right, just
you have that.
Yes, I did, but it's gone because they have a shorter life when we have snow.
Okay.
But yeah, they lasted about 5 years.
Okay.
But they created these seats. They wove them like a basket around a tree out of chestnut, and then made wattle to create raised beds. But the thing that really got me were the windows in the hedges and the giant baskets made out of this wattle that was chestnut, that were full of pumpkin, or they were full of melons. In one area, they were squash. Then there was woven structures for gooseberries and currants and herbs. I mean, I never went to my room there. I walked around and photographed for hours before I ever settled down and unpacked a bag. It was a great moment. It's in Maisonneuve, which is about an hour southeast of Villandry. So if you're in that hood, one more hour, you will be glad you did.
It's kind of like what you do and how you live at home, isn't it? You get out to your house in the country, and before you do anything, from what I remember, you grab those lopas or those snippers and your gardening clogs and get out in the garden, right?
I've done a lot of that in the last year, but before that, yeah, it was really, I needed to connect after a week in the city. I needed to connect to green and flowers and nobody talking to me. to be in that garden.
Mhm.
There's not an urgency about it, but it's a self-imposed urgency. Let's put
Yeah,
it that
the
way.
opposite of urgency. It's quiet and
Yes.
slow and relaxed. Tell us about Ninfa. I've seen this, but I've never been there.
Oh, Margot, you must do it. Not
Uh-huh.
far from Rome. It is about 200 acres, 250 acres. That was a town that was destroyed at the direction of Pope Clement VII during a religious dispute. He had entire, nice Pope, huh? He had entire destroyed.
Mhm.
And it's owned by a trust or foundation of the Catani family. And it's 200 acres of gardens, things growing over the ruins. Some places more manicured than others, others like to do what they will. And this was like one of the entries where we walked between these cypress trees and the Santolina, and then back to another garden that was more tropical with palm trees and just different landscapes, and almost like different climate zones in different parts of it. But I always loved this image of the water flowing out from under the ground into the lake. Yeah. It's pretty romantic. I mean, it's the most romantic ruin I think I've ever seen. And pretty inspired to think about keeping a garden growing just over the ruins. Europeans are much more sensitized to holding on to ruins. We don't think that way because we're not really that old as a country.
Yeah.
But in Europe, they're everywhere. But this one is really special.
I've seen pictures of that water feature forever, and it is.
Oh.
It's so romantic, and so it's a surprise. It's just a surprise. Who would have ever imagined that?
I know.
Okay, here we go.
Oh gosh. Balbianello, I don't know. I've been there about 4 or 5 times. Every time I go to Como, I go back to visit. One, it's a delicious house that was owned by Guido Manzoni, who was a wealthy Italian entrepreneur, collector, and explorer. The whole top floor is a museum dedicated to explorations. You know, his dog sled, his parkas, everything. He was really something. But and the house is beautifully appointed with his collections. And it sits out on this point out into Lake Como. And so it's not really about flowers here.
Yeah. What intrigues you so much?
The structure.
Yeah.
The trees, the way they're sculpted, the fact that it just sort of sits out on a point, and you know, it's like a siren in the water. You know, if you're going by on a boat and you haven't been there, you want to go there. And if you can see it in the upper right of the top slide, you see all those cypress going up, but then there's that domed tree. I actually forget which species it is, but it's the tree that is outside of his bedroom window that they trimmed once a year by hand. It took several weeks, all trimmed by hand. And he had it trimmed so that he could see the view because it blocked his view. And so every year they took it back so that his view of Lake Como would not be inhibited by that tree. And then that lower right slide is creeping fig growing all over the walls of the villa.
That is wild and chaotic and yet ordered and beautiful. And I can see why you're drawn to this, even though it's not super floral. It is, well, I want to go there. Maybe I will someday. Mount Stewart. I like the house. I like the stone garden side. That stone is really perfect. Tell us about Mount Stewart, Charlotte.
I've only been there once. I went with Stan, who you know, architect in Atlanta, and Suzanne Tucker, a
Oh,
mine designer in San Francisco. And we did a tour of Northern Ireland houses and gardens.
mhm.
And we had great access to some spectacular private properties. And we were invited to Mount Stewart to see the house and to tour the garden with the family. And it really blew my mind, I think. I wasn't prepared, although I'd heard it's one of the most gorgeous gardens in Europe, which it is.
Mhm.
Really one of the most spectacular or the most spectacular in that country. But the thing that I just didn't think about at all is that it's only 5 miles from the coastline, and the coastline gets the Gulf Stream,
Mhm.
tropicals. So here you are in Northern Ireland, and you're got palm trees.
So unlikely and unexpected, and all the more wonderful.
All the more wonderful, and an incredible fernery. I mean, the list goes on to the number of gardens here. And the house really is spectacular on the inside with the family's collections. But the garden is absolutely not to be missed when you're in Northern Ireland.
You love Ireland.
I do. I love the people. And so here, you know, there's the Shamrock Garden. The rhododendrons are spectacular.
Mhm.
The second largest rhododendron in the world is in Northern Ireland. And then wonderful Crown Imperialis, I think that Fritillaria,
Mhm.
just growing, you know. I mean, we
Just out
we
there.
try to grow something like that in a pot and make it perfect,
Mhm.
but this is it's just growing. So it is really spectacular. The house, and there's a folly on the property that's wonderful. The old stables, a must do, a must do.
Mhm. So this is another spot you return to, right?
It beckons, Margot. It beckons. You know,
See why.
I've been to Ballyfin 5 times. I'm going again, hopefully at the end of this year. Ballyfin was a private residence, became sort of, and then it became a school, a boys' school, and then it just sort of fell into disrepair. And a family from Chicago bought it, turned it into the most spectacular country house hotel with only like 24 rooms. You really feel like you're in someone's private home. It is absolute. Colin Orchard decorated it. I mean, it is divine. And so is everyone there that works there. But what I love about it is, as a hotel, you don't really think about it as a hotel. You think that you're in someone's home, and you're invited to explore all of their gardens behind the fruit trees, the potager, and then all the flower gardens.
And this incredibly interesting water
Wow.
feature here.
Oh yes, another one of those things that every time we ride by on our cart, Barry goes, "I don't know where it's gonna go," you know, kind of thing. So that, believe it or not, that building in the background was a chicken house. And that
Swanky chicken house.
I know, pretty swanky, huh?
Yeah.
And that's pineapple fountain was right in front of the chicken house. I really fabulous.
It is, and I love that because you see all the classical designs of pineapples in finials and artwork and sculptures, and this is such a wonky, you know, sort of irreverent pineapple, and that symbol of hospitality. Sorry?
Yeah, the scale is all off. It's a little rustic, but maybe it's that Irish version of hospitality, a symbol of hospitality. But it is truly a great place. Do not go there thinking that you're going to play golf or tennis or whatever. You go there, you walk, you canoe, you read, you have a beautiful dinner, and you get a great night of sleep.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
Kuskovo. I'm guessing that's in Russia somewhere.
It is outside of Moscow.
Okay.
And, I included this because it really shocked me. I was taken, first of all, I went on tour in Russia to lecture, and ended up, the last stop was Moscow. And the company that brought me to Russia said they had to take me someplace special on the end of my trip.
Mm-hmm.
They could not have picked a more spectacular, jaw-dropping thing for me to see before I got on a plane.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a pink frame palace in the countryside. The garden has like 8 avenues that all terminate in an aviary, an orangery, a Dutch house, an Italian house, a grotto, all, hornbeam alleys.
Mm-hmm.
And like you can see clearly on the upper right, and then the left leading to the Italian house. And then I just love how life imitates art and vice versa, where the pink and green leaf reflect. It was, and the house itself was fantastic. The way it had been maintained and restored on the inside, and its furnishings were spectacular. But to me, to leave Moscow, if you've ever been, it was quite a jolt to have at this palace.
It's a wonderful, punchy farewell. You wanted to come back.
It was the best.
So, the Alhambra.
The Alhambra and the Generalife Gardens in Spain had eluded me on 2 trips. Friends had invited me to go, and I couldn't. So when my husband and I decided we would go to Spain, he knew that this was really important to me to see the Alhambra, and it was going to be jammed with people. So he arranged for us to have a private tour of the palace at night with a curator, which was great because, again, I could take pictures with no tourist, but also to see the famous water features in the Generalife. And the picture on the left is just one of those life lessons you learn about gardens, that it doesn't have to be about abundance. It doesn't have to be about vastness. It doesn't have to be about great sums of money. This is the Court of the Lions. And in the very center is a fountain surrounded by stone lions. But in every corner, there's one of these little trees sculpted like lollipops that just punctuate the space and bring green into this cool courtyard. But it really said to me, that was the lesson. Just one can do the trick.
An exclamation point.
Yeah.
Oh, gorgeous. Schonbrunn.
So I think, is Schonbrunn our last? Let me check. Just gotta. Yes.
Hit from Kimberly.
I know. I thought I ended on Schonbrunn because it was a painted garden versus a cultivated garden, but created by Maria Theresa, Marie Antoinette's mother. Created these rooms, designed and painted by Johann Bergel. Took him 9 years to paint because the heat started to get to her later in her life, and she didn't want to spend her time out in the gardens at Schonbrunn, which are pretty spectacular. She wanted to have a garden inside, and she made rooms for also 2 of her children adjacent to her rooms. And the landscape in here is, it's classical, it's whimsical, it's tropical, and it's very cool. Cool in 2 ways. It's a very cool space, but it's also cooling.
That green.
When you're in there. But if you go to Vienna and you're planning to go to Schonbrunn, you must make an appointment far in advance to see the bird. Yeah. And that is really probably one piece of advice I would give to everyone about any of these gardens.
Mm-hmm.
You look online and it tells you when they're going to be open. Call always and make sure, because they change all the time.
This is, I mean, this one slide with all the different decorative art, with all the details. I mean, it's just it's a tutorial in and of itself. It just makes me want to have it as my screensaver.
Well, you know, can imagine that someone spent 9 years of his life painting trompe l'oeil, several rooms. That's, you know, anyway.
Really
sorry.
Wonderful. So India.
So I think India is probably, it's not the country that you would think about big green gardens and lots of flowers, but there is a great flower association with India, and marigolds being, you know, I was there during the Diwali festival, and marigolds are used everywhere for decoration. But what I loved about India was the way flowers were, how would you say it, commemorated basically in tile, in wood carving, in mosaics, in frescoes, that flowers were really everywhere in India. But they weren't necessarily in the gardens, which is just another type of garden. You know, just the way Virgil brought the garden inside with Troy, you know, those flowers are carved in soapstone and marble inside the Taj Mahal. Everywhere you look, they're there.
There they are. Flowers everywhere. A dream come true.
Dream come true.
So we can look at a couple of these muses. Our time is running out, but let's, I love hearing about people that inspire you because you are such an inspiration. Let's talk about these three women.
Well, quickly, you know, Gloria was a great artist. She painted a lot of flowers, and probably when she did her licensing with Bloomcraft in the 70s, really put the tulip on the map. But she was really one of the first designers to do licensing. And but I love her whimsical interpretation of flowers. Fleur Coles, on the other hand, did another type of painting of flowers, among the other things that she did, through her magical realism paintings with lions and tigers and flowers in the background. So she was a friend of Dolly's. She wrote his biography. And so you can see a little bit of that influence there in Fleur, and lived a very long, productive, exciting life. And Evangeline Bruce I included because, you know, this wonderful room designed by Colfax and Fowler, you would not think of someone in such a beautiful formal room putting broccoli flowerets in her silver tea canisters for decoration and table settings, and she did. But the reason I include the muses, we have another slide that includes Pauline de Rothschild, the next one. Yeah, because all of these women had such discipline, and they had style. And they had style because they had confidence, and they just sort of walked to that different beat, every one of them. But Pauline, you know, we think of tablescapes now, we don't think anything of it. But back then, when Pauline was doing it, you know, she sort of stepped out of that realm of formal French table settings and created landscapes down the middle of the table. So there's always someone that's first. And she was one of the first. And just the quintessential, like, style icon.
And those boots.
Oh, let's say, how about those boots?
They came back with a vengeance a couple of years ago.
Oh, they'll always be back if you got the stems to put in a pair of boots like that.
That's right. That's right. That's a good point, Charlotte. Well, I think we are going to take some questions now, Charlotte. Thank you for taking us not all over the world, but to some of the most fabulous spots in your archive, your personal archive. And I feel like I've almost been to these places, but let's see, let's get some questions here. Okay, let's see. Charlotte, what would be your favorite focal point idea from your travels to translate to a narrow shade garden in town?
Depends on how narrow. You know, I mean, first of all, I'm not a professional gardener, so I can only like wing it here. If it's narrow and it's shady, you're almost going to be limited to what can climb on walls, and then really robust borders on either side. You know, things that will be what I call steady partners in the garden for you that will survive, whether it's variegated Pachysandra, Stephanandra, things like that that will really grow in and create great borders and come back year after year, which is the best.
So if you could travel to only one garden in Europe, which I don't know that you could do that, Charlotte, but if you could only travel to one, which one would it be?
Probably, definitely something I haven't done before, something that I haven't spent a lot of time in. And I'd probably go to Sweden in the summer, or I would go to some of maybe the gardens in Germany, because they also have great follies, and I'd be interested in the architecture as well as the follies. But I'd probably pick Sweden number one.
So why? Just for my information.
Just aesthetically, I love the design aesthetic of Swedish, you know, whether it's Gustavian, we're looking at old palaces. They're spare, highly edited, beautiful palettes, and the gardens too. You know, I think there's we all strive for something. You know, I'm from the more is more school. I love things, I collect, but there's a part of me that always wants to dial it back, and I'm looking for inspiration on who can kick me in the pants hard enough to get me there. I don't think I'll ever get there, but I can dream about it.
Well, it's the process. It's the journey. So, stunning presentation. Did you take the pictures? If so, what camera did you use?
Yes, all the pictures that I show in a lecture, I took myself. And it ranged everywhere from an Olympus stylus in the very beginning to Canon like super shots to a Mark III.
Okay.
What's all over the map. And I tell you, the latest iPhones take fabulous pictures.
I know. I just upgraded.
And they're not heavy, you know, so.
No, they're great. They're great. Okay, we've got a lot of questions. We can only answer a few more. What are your favorite gardens in New England?
You know, I haven't done much in New England. That's, you know, that's really.
Might be time.
You know, I haven't spent any time in Maine, and there's some beautiful gardens there. You know, Boston, of course, the Isabella Stewart Gardner, the house and the garden. I really haven't spent any time there, so I really can't speak to it. But okay. I would love it if you would send some ideas to info@Charlotte Moss if you've got some.
That sounds great. And we've talked about doing something in the Northeast, Charlotte. So, okay. What about a water feature in a quarter-acre suburban lot?
I think a small fountain. And I don't mean a structure fountain, just a water in a pool with a, gurgling thing in the middle, so to speak, surrounded by plantings. I just love hearing the water and seeing it. It's soothing, both. So square, round, whatever size you want to make it.
I love that. I love that, because with that small space, to just have something that's flush but reflects and sounds and does, a lot of different things. I think that sounds brilliant.
And it's courageous, I think it's courageous when someone takes a quarter of an acre and puts a water feature in it. Most people would never do that.
Yeah. Good for you, person who asked that question. So do you have any tips for hosting a small garden party or brunch?
Oh, Lord.
Well, you're the fabulous entertainer.
Well,
drill down.
It's such a personal thing. I would never want to impose.
That's true. That's a good point.
I never want to impose my own ideas on people, because it's what I do for myself.
Yeah.
I just love, keep it simple.
Mm-hmm.
Just keep it simple. Have a backyard picnic. Think about it as a backyard picnic, and let everybody have fun, and serve ice cream sundaes. Just don't serve anything fussy. Just make it fun and simple.
Love that. I agree with that. And are your own inspired gardens open for tours?
No. But no, I said that quickly. They have been open on some garden tours for a museum and another garden group.
I'm sorry, I missed that last thing. You broke up. They have been open, but for what?
Well, they have been open to like a museum group,
fundraisers.
Yeah, fundraisers, really. Yeah. And
Okay.
Small groups, but that's it.
Yeah, we don't want the hordes coming through and trampling on your beautiful flowers. So Charlotte, this is a perfect last question. Such a fabulous presentation. What is your next design and or book project? Can we talk about home?
Yes, we can talk about home.
Okay.
Oh, somebody question. Oh, God bless you. God bless you for asking that question. Yeah. During COVID, at the very beginning of COVID, I started to see the food lines and read the statistics about hunger in our country. And I had, and it was very disconcerting. I had a book in my library for a very long time, Edith Wharton's Book of the Homeless, which she wrote during World War I to raise money for the orphans coming out of Belgium and into Paris. And she went to all of her friends, Henry James, Rupert Brooke, Cocteau. She went to everyone and said, do something for me for this book, do a drawing, write some music, write a short story, whatever you want to do. She did this book, and it's always been in my library. And last year I decided, when I started to hear about these school children that were now not having their meals during the day, it broke my heart. So I called 5 friends. We created a committee. We went out to our friends. We prioritized the list. I said, we're going to do this. I know we can do this. Rizzoli got behind the project, and they've been an incredible partner. And P.S., we will have a book called Home, a celebration with 120 contributors. Will be released October 6th, and the money will be to go to No Kid Hungry for their school program. We have 1 in 6 children in our country, believe it or not, are food challenged. 1 in 6. So anyway, 120 people answered the call. Hallelujah, Jesus. They all came to the answer the call and created great things. I mean, Isaac Mizrahi did watercolors. Candace Bergen did something, Bette Midler, John Meacham, John Grisham, the list goes on, and lots of my designer friends, including Ms. Shaw here. So I hope you'll all buy it for Christmas presents, because
That's a great idea.
the money's going to a good cause.
Charlotte, you are the best, and I so appreciate your generosity and your heart and your compassion. And I would urge, I have seen the original book, the Edith Wharton book, which you gave me so generously and graciously. So I can't wait to see your interpretation with all of the 21st century talent. And so I do advocate for that book, that everyone go and order that, or can we pre-order it now?
And yes, you can
Amazon?
you can pre-order it on Amazon. And what we always tell people is to go to your local bookseller, tell them about the book, and have them order it from Rizzoli.
Yes.
You know, it's on the presses now in Italy, and I can't wait to get my hot little hands on the first edition.
Well, I look forward to seeing that. I look forward to seeing you again, Charlotte. And thank you so much for being a part of ADAC in Bloom, our 10th anniversary. I have to say that again. Hard to imagine. This is not your first visit to ADAC in Bloom, so thanks for coming back. And thank you again, ADAC, and all of you who tuned in. And we will hopefully see you at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, when Fernando Wong will be my next guest. You're in for a treat with that as well.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Margot. You make it easy.
Oh, you make me look good, Charlotte. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.